Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, August 6th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about Deion in Colorado. There was a very interesting article that came out from Athlon Sports that describe some not so great culture over there in Boulder, and I'll break down what exactly I mean in the first segment here. Then we'll get into the best thing that each conference has to offer in 2024, what I think is the absolute best thing that you're going to see from each conference and what could end up deciding each conference at the very end of the day. And then we'll get into players that need to make the most out of fall camp. We did this yesterday with the big four teams in the college football world. We're going to do 5 more today, so we'll break down that for you guys. Then we'll get into more fall camp updates. They just keep rolling in, so I want to make sure you guys are fully updated as they do. And then we'll finish it out with some conference questions. We're going to roll through every conference this week, get through all of the different questions I have as we get closer to week 1, some different ones that are going to have a ton to say about this upcoming year. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always fun for the both of us. Again, if you want to use that, that is GSMCpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this Colorado article that came out from Athlon Sports, and it said some very aggressive things about Colorado, and especially what's happening behind the scenes and all of that different stuff, and there were a lot of very, very interesting things to pull from this. There were a lot of former players quoted, mainly former players quoted, which is why I'll kind of approach this with a little bit of a grain of salt. I don't want to necessarily jump on Colorado and, totally tear them apart right here, but there were some things that were named here that were not too great. I'll just leave it at that for the time being, but there was a ton of stuff that came out in this, and one of the big-time quotes that everyone's kind of taking and running with is, it's like a real-life Grand Theft Auto game. There are so many distractions with fights, guns, money floating around. The environment is unlike any I've come from before. And I actually believe that it's unlike any environment he's ever come from before. We know that Deion runs things differently. That's just the reality of Colorado. When you go there, it is going to be different than every other university in college football as of right this second. Now, some might end up heading more that direction. Maybe Colorado heads more back to the pack. But as of right this second, it is different. Now, the whole, it's like real-life Grand Theft Auto, I think is a little bit blown out of proportion. If you played Grand Theft Auto, you'd be shocked if a football program was operating that way. But at the end of the day, it's obviously something that, needs a little bit of attention. This is a former player that is saying that this is pretty much a clown show. There's a million things going on that have nothing to do with football and actually take away from what they can do on the football field. So this is obviously something that, frankly, I would be surprised if it was like Grand Theft Auto, because if it was, you'd see a lot more headlines coming out of Boulder, Colorado. But at the end of the day, it does kind of paint a picture of sorts of what's kind of going on there and kind of how everything is handled. But the real one I want to get into has to do with Cormani McClain. He was the very talented corner that was there and transferred after his freshman year. He is now at Florida after walking on there, and there have been a lot of stories around him. When he came to Colorado, there were stories from Deion himself, throughout camp and all that type of thing, saying he just wasn't doing what he had to do throughout last year to get on the field and play the amount of amount of snaps that someone like Travis Hunter did the year before him. So obviously that was been a big topic of conversation. That has obviously been something that has dominated a lot of what has happened around Colorado. Cormani McClain is now at Florida and seems to be doing a fine job there, although some people keep trying to say he's getting kicked off the team, although he's not. But there are definitely some things that happened at Colorado that seemed a little interesting, right? It definitely felt like he was not comfortable there. It definitely felt like something was wrong in the communication between him and the Colorado coaching staff. Well, it sounds like Cormani McClain was, as this former player puts it, was bullied by Shiloh Sanders. He says that Shiloh Sanders slapped him several times. It said it led to Cormani McClain running off the field, essentially screaming at everyone, essentially blowing up at everyone, and he, from that point forward, was just not mentally on the team, was just not mentally there every day, and wasn't going to play the football that he's capable of playing. This is the one that is super serious to me. I think when you look at this team and you know that you know that Deion points in the direction of the star players, and frankly, every single coach in the country points in the direction of their star players. That's just the reality of this game, and it's the way that it likely should be. You have to make sure that your starting quarterback is handled probably before your third string corner, and that's just the way it is. But at the end of the day, there is a couple of things that, if this is 100% true, then we know a couple of things. One, this is a non-championship level culture, because the reality is every culture that is a championship level culture is player-led. I don't care if it's, you can demand a lot of a guy. You can absolutely push him to be the best version of himself, and to push himself in practice, and to do some things that, frankly, a lot of us would not be willing to do. What you can't do is make physical contact with him. What you can't do is slap him during practice. What you can't do is hypothetically bully him during practice, which is what Shiloh Sanders is alleged to do in this scenario. That can't happen. I understand that football is an aggressive sport. I understand that there are guys that have to get after other guys because they're not putting in the effort that they have to. They can do it in other ways. It's just plain and simple. Every single other culture around the country that is really strong right now is not doing this. I can promise you that. Now, there players that get upset with each other and maybe start shoving each other, a fight here and there, sure. But there absolutely is not a player that is outright bullying a kid and getting away with it. I can promise you that. I'm just telling you as plainly as I can that if this is what's happening at that school, and if Shiloh especially is not getting in trouble for it, this is not a championship level culture, and it never will be if this continues. Number two is Deion allows his sons to get away with stuff that he doesn't allow others to get away with. If he's going to allow, Shiloh to bully a kid, to straight up, make physical contact with a kid during a football practice that is outside the football realm, they're playing on the same side of the ball, so there's no world where they would have to be making physical contact with each other. So it's one of those things where we knew that he leans towards his sons. We know that that's going to be a big thing, especially Shadur is going to get a lot of love in that program, and they should. They're both really good players, and they both have a ton of say in what goes on in that program, especially Shadur. And so I'm not necessarily tearing down Deion for leaning towards his sons a little bit, because he should. They are his sons. There's no two ways about that. I'm not necessarily tearing him down for that, but you have to hold all your players to the same standard. I understand saying, my sons are going to be incredible players at the next level and they're going to do all these incredible things, because you should feel that way about your kids. What you shouldn't do is allow your kids to walk on the field and act differently than anyone else on that team, because you're setting the wrong example for everyone else. You're setting the wrong example for them when they go forward into the NFL. There's a million different problems with that. But if this is actually happening, and I want to say if every single time that I bring this up, because these are just quotes from a former player, and if we've learned anything, there are some former players that come from Colorado that are none too happy about what happened at Colorado and are willing to, I don't want to say lie because I don't know what the story is here, but definitely don't want to tear down Colorado by any means on the other side of this. So I'm going to try to play it as straightforward as I possibly can, but it doesn't change that if this is true, they have a couple of problems that are not going to be fixed necessarily anytime soon and would take some time to fix. The other big-time story that came out of this was around Jordan Seaton, the very talented five-star offensive tackle. It sounds like there was a little bit of fighting going on, and the way they put it was alleged bullied into proving his manhood, and he was decided to pick a fight with a former Colorado offensive lineman, Zabien Washington, a very talented offensive lineman that played for them a lot of last year, and apparently they fought back in April, and it was a very, very bloody affair. It was very, gross, to be totally honest with you. So this is something that is insane. Plainly, if this is actually what's happening in that program, if that's actually what unfolds, this is gross. There's no two other ways to put it. I understand, maybe this isn't exactly how it went down, and frankly, I would be surprised if this is exactly how it went down. But at the end of the day, if this happened on your watch and you knew that you had two players fighting, it's insane, it's gross, it's everything in between, and all of these kids, they show their toughness on the football field. They show their toughness in the weight room. They show their toughness when they go out on Saturdays and they play that game. They don't need to show their toughness by fighting each other. I can promise you that. They are plenty tough, and if they're not tough enough on the football field, then they don't play. That's the reality of this game. You don't need to prove it in the locker room. That's not a reality of any sport, so I think that's absolutely insane. Frankly, I think it's incredibly gross that that's even out there into the world. If it's true, then you have some real problems on your hands, and frankly, I think there would be plenty of consequences. Let's just leave it at that for the time being. But there were also a couple of incidences around some recruits for Colorado. Ebenezer Boozy was a talented player that got arrested for battery and gun charges back this offseason, and Chidozie Nwanko, flashed a gun during his commitment to Colorado. These are something that I'm not going to put on Deion at all. I've talked about this a little bit, but there's only so much a college football coach can do, especially if the kid isn't even in your program yet. You can't necessarily stop that. I understand you want the right kids in your program, and maybe he's showing he's not the right kid, but that's something that I'm not putting on Deion. I'm not putting on Colorado, because at the end of the day, these kids are adults. They make their own decisions, and some of them make really, really bad decisions. So I refuse to use that as a moniker to throw in Colorado's face. But I have a million different questions coming out of this. And that's kind of the biggest thing here is when you're looking at this article, it has a million different crazy quotes and it has a million different things to kind of pull from and say, wow, all of this stuff is terrible and Colorado's doing everything wrong and the culture is terrible and dangerous and toxic. Whatever word you want to throw out there, it's very easy to say that. I have a million questions because if all of this is totally true, Colorado will never be a team that you have to worry about, period. They will never be a championship level roster. Frankly, Deion will be fired before the next 3 years. If some of this is true, you still have problems you have to fix within that culture. There's no two ways about that. Now, there's the other side of this. Maybe a kid was just really frustrated. Maybe a kid was, embellishing the truth to make it seem like this is a worse place than it is. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm also not saying that's not what happened. I'm not going to sit here and, tear apart Colorado's program with something that is just a quote from a player. I don't know all the details. I'm sure we will get more details, but also on the other side of this, Athlon isn't dumb. They are a news agency. They are a sports news agency. They understand that if they were to make false claims in this, then they could get possibly sued. Now, some of this is a little bit of a gray area because you are quoting someone else, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of different questions more than anything else. I think you look at this roster, you look at this program, and there's a lot of things to like. That talent level has gotten so much better since Deion has shown up, and he's done so many good things within that team when you talk about the football roster. There are questions behind the scenes. It seems like these stories come out about Colorado more often than they come out about pretty much anyone else, and I don't think it's necessarily coming from nowhere. How aggressive it is definitely needs to be found out, and it's definitely something that, kind of underscores some of the challenges that they could kind of shows maybe Coach Prime's leadership style is not the right way. Now, all of this depends on, how true all these statements are. So I'm not here to, tear down Colorado. I'm not here to act like Deion is, a horrifying person or putting these kids in really bad positions or encouraging these kids to do anything that's not right. I'm not here to do that. I won't do that until we absolutely know the facts around this. But it is a very interesting story, and it's one that we frankly have to talk about, and one that I think we'll know more about here in, a couple of months, possibly down the road a little bit. But it's troubling. At the very least, it's troubling to know that these are even stories that could come out. And if they're true, then you have some real problems at Colorado that, frankly, might not be fixed by this current administration. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, we'll keep you updated with everything that comes out because it is a rather explosive story that could end the entire era of Deion at Colorado. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about each conference, give you the best thing from each conference, maybe the thing that will decide each of these conferences. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, this shit a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Colorado article that came out from Athlon Sports, a very, very interesting article with a ton of very interesting quotes, not necessarily saying anything in stone, obviously with a lot of different things going around about Colorado, but I have to imagine we'll hear more about this down the road, so we'll update you when we do. But let's get into what we're going to get from each conference this year. What is the big thing that you're getting when you turn on an SEC game, or when you turn on a Big 10 or Big 12 or ACC game? What is the one thing that you're going to get on that Saturday? And if you don't get it, it means that other team that's not getting it is going to lose that game. It might just be the decider in a lot of these conferences. And let's start with the SEC, because I think this one is the biggest cut and dry one in the country. It's the quarterback play. It's going to be outright special in that conference this year. To my knowledge, or if you were to ask me, they do have the best two quarterbacks in the country in that conference with Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck, and they face off in Austin on October 19th. So cannot wait to see that matchup. Both those quarterbacks are as elite as it gets, and then you add matchups like Jackson Dart versus Carson Beck, Jalen Milroe versus Carson Beck, and Jackson Dart versus Garrett Nussmeier, a ton of ones that are really just a NFL scout's dream. There will be plenty of NFL scouts at SEC games watching these quarterbacks this fall, and I think there's a number of guys in this group that can absolutely make a run at this and be possibly the one that elevates above the pack. And frankly, I think whoever has the best quarterback in that conference is going to be the one taking home the trophy in Atlanta at the end of the year. So I do think this will kind of be the decider here, and the guy that I'm watching most closely is Jalen Milroe. I've talked about this before, and I've said he's the most powerful guy in that conference, and I think it goes any two ways. I think that he's someone that, frankly, could run away with the Heisman this year. That's how good I think this kid is, and that's how good I think this offense, in particular, under Kalen DeBoer is going to be. So I do think he has that high ability. I also think there's a world where he doesn't take that step forward that you need him to in the NFL level throws. He doesn't make the 20, 30 yards down the field. He doesn't make those throws quite as consistently as you think he's going to make them, has some turnover troubles, doesn't necessarily fit into the offense the way you want, and Alabama takes a little bit of a step back. So he's absolutely someone that could open up so many doors. If he hits his big-time ceiling, then that Georgia game gets that much more important. Then the Tennessee game gets that much more fun, especially from the quarterback perspective. And then there's a ton of other guys that are going to add to the fun of this, where you have Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, who I think is going to be a ton of fun to watch. Jackson Arnold has all the talent in the world to sling the ball all over the field. Connor Wegman at A&M could be a first-round NFL draft pick if he puts it all together this upcoming year, but everyone's watching Nico Iamaleava. Everyone wants to see what this kid can do, and frankly, I think when you look at the long-term effects at least, I think you look at 2-3 years down the road, I think this might be the most talented quarterback out of the four I just named. I think Jackson Arnold is right up there, if I'm being totally honest, but Nico Iamaleava, I think, could win a Heisman, could be one of the best Tennessee quarterbacks to ever play. Right there next to Peyton Manning, I think, could be this kid. So I do think he has that talent about him. And then you had a kid like Graham Mertz, who's always going to execute. Brady Cook, who is as steady as can be and is going to make plays this year, especially with the wide receivers he has around him. And then Peyton Thorne could pop this year. Maybe you get a little Brock Vandegrift big year. Maybe Diego Pavia comes into Vanderbilt and makes some really fun games out of it. But the reality is, when you tune into SEC play, you're going to see really good quarterback play, at least on one side of the ball. Maybe you won't see it on both sides, and the one you don't see it on, that will be the losing team 9 times out of 10. But I do think when you look at this conference, you have, in my opinion, the two best quarterbacks in the country. I think you have probably 4 of the top 6 to 8 guys in the country, and then you have guys like Nico Iamaleava, Garrett Nussmeier, Connor Wegman, Jackson Arnold that could all be top 15, top 20 guys at the end of the year if they can hit all the right notes. So it's an incredible conference, and pretty much every week you're going to have at least 2 or 3 quarterback battles that you just cannot wait to watch. But Let's move on to the Big Ten, and I want to talk about the defensive masterpieces that we're going to get this upcoming year, the polar opposite of what you're going to get in the SEC. You are going to get Big Ten football. There's no two ways about that. There is going to be a lot of running, especially with the running backs there. That's actually another thing that you're going to get is some really, really remarkable running back performances. But I do think defensively, there's so many different teams that are going to be able to make some big-time plays this upcoming year. Ohio State, by my estimation, is the best defense in the country. I think they have the most guys. I think they are the deepest at the positions they need to be, and I think the two edge rushers they have in particular in JT Tuiomalau and Jack Sawyer are just monsters. I think they're going to wreak all types of havoc all throughout this conference, and I would be surprised if they were not at least top 10 this upcoming year on the defensive side of the ball. And then over at Michigan, you have the best interior defensive lineman in the country with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and then you have the best corner in the country in Will Johnson. They will be able to stop people. It will not necessarily be a Michigan defense that takes the same step back that I expect the offense to, so they will be stifling. There's no two ways about that. They will absolutely have plenty to say about what goes on in this conference on the offensive side of the ball. So going to be a really, really fun group led by those three guys, and it's going to be really hard to get through them. I promise you that. And then you have some other teams out there. Penn State also has, in my estimation, the best defensive player in the conference in Abdul Carter, among a ton of other really good players. Oregon's defense is just loaded with talent and frankly should at least be top 20 this upcoming year. But then you get down to Nebraska, who was number 11 last year and returns, I believe, 9 starters on that defense from last year. Absolutely ridiculous, and they're going to be a really, really good group this upcoming year. Iowa with Phil Parker is just set your clock. They're going to be a good defense. They're going to be able to make plays, and especially when you have the safety and linebacker duos that they have, they are going to be one of the best teams in this conference on the defensive side of the ball. And then you add a couple of teams that could take big time steps forward. I think Indiana is a team that will be interesting to watch on the defensive side of the ball. Adding guys like C.J. West from Kent State. You added D'Angelo Pond, came over from JMU with Kirk Cignetti. So I do think there's enough teams that can make some leaps. I think Rutgers is going to be a really solid defense. USC obviously could make a big time leap under D'Anton Lynn. And you're going to see a ton of Big Ten football. You're going to see a lot of running the ball. You're going to see some low scoring games. And you're going to see some teams that are just going to have to play defensive masterpieces if they're going to want to win. So it's going to be absolutely incredible to watch, and I just cannot wait to get into the Big Ten season because it's going to be different, but it's going to be the same Big Ten. I can promise you that. There's still going to be some hard-nosed football played up there. But let's get into the ACC, and when you look at the ACC, you have Florida State, you have Clemson, you have Miami. You feel pretty confident that those are the teams. Those are the teams up top, and those are the teams that you expect to see in some form or fashion in Charlotte at the end of the year. But you have a ton of spoilers in here. I do think SMU, NC State, and Virginia Tech also kind of make their way up into the upper echelon at least a little bit. But you look at a team like Georgia Tech. I think that's the most interesting team to me because any given Saturday, they can beat any team in this conference. And I'm being totally honest. This offense can keep up with pretty much anyone in the country, and they have been able to do that every game of last year. They were really, really talented on that side of the ball, and it gives them the ability to pop on a certain Saturday and beat a team like Florida State or beat a team like Clemson and possibly make some noise this upcoming year. Now, the schedule itself is a nightmare, so I think overall they're not going to be able to make too much noise in this conference, but on a given Saturday, they absolutely can. There's going to be plenty of spoilers in this conference, and frankly, I think Georgia Tech is probably the biggest of the bunch. Then the other interesting one is Cal. I really want to talk about Cal because we talked about how far they have to travel this upcoming year. Well, people got to make their way out to Cal sometimes. So it's definitely going to be one of those things where they definitely do have the advantage in the other way. And they have the best player on the field the majority of the time when they play these really tough teams. When you have Jaden Ott on the field, he is as special of a player in this entire conference as you will find. Now, they have Miami, they have NC State, they have Syracuse making their way out to California to play them. They win at least one of those games. I don't know which one. Syracuse would be the easiest of the bunch, obviously, but they will win one of those games, and it'll be because of the travel. It'll be because Jaden Ott is an absolute beast. It'll be because some of the different playmakers they got on the outside, like Tobias Merriweather from Notre Dame. But I do think they have enough players to win one of those games and possibly ruin a season for North Carolina State or for Miami or for maybe even Syracuse. So it'll be really fun to watch that. And then finally, I want to talk about Boston College and Thomas Castellanos, and Virginia and Anthony Colandrea. I think both of those guys are really talented quarterbacks that could cause problems on pretty much any Saturday for a defense. Particularly Castellanos is a guy that I think is going to have a huge year and is going to be a really, really fun player. And frankly, you could do all you can on the defensive side of the ball. He can find a way to get out of it and make a really good play. So I'm really excited to watch this guy play. I think Bill O'Brien's going to give that offense a little bit of consistency that they've lacked in the past, and I think having a quarterback like that could open up a chance for you to play spoiler on any given Saturday. So very much like the Eagles going into this year, I think they have a shot to make some noise, and I think that quarterback will be at the very center of it. But then finally, I want to talk about the Big 12. And frankly, what you're getting from the Big 12 this upcoming year is just chaos all across the board. There is not these big-time gaps. In the ACC, I think, and in the Big 10, frankly, I think you have these teams that are grouped up towards the top, and then you have these teams that are grouped in the middle, and then you have these teams that are grouped at the bottom, but you have division between them. The Big 12 doesn't really have that division. You have Utah and Kansas State up at the top. They're the teams that tend to be setting the pace and the teams that are the favorites to go to Arlington at the end of the year. Then you take a very small step down and you get to a team like Oklahoma State. They absolutely are right there with those teams. It's not like they are far off from those teams by any means, especially with a player like Ollie Gordon. So I do think they are a really fun team. And then you take a little step down and you get to Kansas, you get to Arizona, you get to Iowa State. None of those teams are really that far away from a Kansas State or a Utah at the end of the day, and a bounce of ball could make all of the difference. And then you take another step down. You got UCF, Texas Tech, TCU, and more. And then finally, the real one that makes this a total chaos conference is the team that is the biggest chaos in the entire college football world. Colorado can make everything go crazy this upcoming year. If this offensive line can block, let's say, a 50% clip higher than they did a year ago, they can cut the sacks in half, which might be a little bit lofty, but at the end of the day, if they can do that, they have the best quarterback in this conference. They have the guy that can dice up pretty much any defense that he encounters, and they have a team that can put together a really good season. Now, they need a lot of things to go their way, particularly injury luck, but I do think this is a team that could totally turn this conference on its head, and frankly, you look at this conference, and you could easily talk me into 10 different teams making this conference title game, where you go all the way down to TCU, and I could hear an argument for that team making their way into Arlington at the end of the year. So you're going to get every single week, you're going to get multiple games that are going to go down to the wire. You're going to get a couple of upsets that you did not expect. You're probably going to get to the end of the season and not see a team that has any less than 2 losses in this conference, because it's going to be a nightmare. And whoever is able to come out on top of it, whoever is able to handle all of the different bumps and bruises and the really long season, is going to be the one that wins it. But it's going to be so much fun to watch those conferences. I think when you look at the SEC, the quarterback play just jumps out at you, but everyone else, has a number of different things going for it. But I do think chaos in the Big 12. I do think spoilers in the ACC. I do think defense in the Big 10 will be the deciding factors and will be what you get pretty much every Saturday. But let's take our final break here, or our second break here, not even close to our final break. Let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to get back into players that need to make the most out of fall camp. A couple of players we did yesterday. We got into the top 4 teams in the country. We'll get into 5 more today, and we'll break down a couple of players that just need to hit big over the next couple of weeks. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about what you're getting from each conference every single Saturday. You're going to get some really good quarterback play out in the SEC, and you're going to get some really good defensive play up in the Big Ten. So definitely a lot of things to watch up this upcoming year. But let's jump into the third segment here, and let's talk about the players that just have to have a big-time fall camp. We got into this yesterday. We got through the Big Four teams, as I call them, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia. Now we're going to get into some other title contenders, and just give you a couple of players that just have to hit it big, have to be big players in the fall camp because they're going to have to head in with a ton of confidence into this upcoming year. But let's go ahead and jump in here, and I want to start in Ole Miss, and I want to start with Chris Paul Jr. He is someone that they need to hit big. Just plain and simple, they need someone on that defensive side of the ball that can fit all of this together. I love all of the transfers that they brought in. I think they did such a good job by not just filling the needs that they need, not just filling their needs, but filling them with really, really talented, really experienced players. And that's obviously the big-time thing. You got Walter Nolan in that front line. You got Prince Augumeniela off the edge. Brandon Turnage in that back end is a really solid player. So they did a number of really good things in the portal. Trey Amos coming in at that corner position. But you need the glue. You need the guy that's going to bring it all together, possibly even wear that green dot and be the communicator for this defense. I think it might just be Chris Paul Jr. And when I look at this defense overall, the linebacker group is the one that I have the most worry about. And it could be the one that kind of defines this team. If you can't run fit in the run game, you're going to have a really hard time stopping a team like Georgia with a guy like Trevor Etienne. So I think Chris Paul Jr., he comes over from Arkansas, had 74 tackles a year ago, can be a leader for this defense. No two ways about that. Can absolutely be the guy that kind of brings it all together, is the communicator, is the green dot guy at the end of the day. But he's going to have to come along during fall camp, whether it's communication style, whether it's, just getting along with your teammates a little bit better, whatever it is, he's going to have to make some strides during this next couple of weeks, and he's a plenty talented player that absolutely can pull that off, but he's going to have to make it come together because they're going to jump into a really important year, and if he can't execute, this entire defense is going to be a little more disappointing than people want it to be. And then Diego Pounds is the other guy that I think has to have a huge year. This O-line is being rebuilt in a number of different ways. They brought in a ton of guys through the portal that are going to start one way or the other. Nate Kalepo, Julius Ballou, and this guy right here, they're going to have to find their way onto the field. They just have to. And it's going to be maybe the deciding factor in this season because you have plenty of really talented guys on that offense. Doesn't do you any good if you can't defend Jackson Dart. It doesn't do you any good if you can't get a running game going with Ulysses Bentley and Henry Parrish and all of the guys that they have over there. So this is someone that he's playing that left tackle position. He is going to be their starter at left tackle, and he's got to be ready to go from week one. I understand they have a little bit of runway into the season, but he's going to have to be ready to go because he's going to face some really good edge rushers, including guys like Mykel Williams, someone from LSU. Harold Perkins is going to come at you plenty that game. I can promise you that. So it's going to be one of those things that this offensive line is going to be the decider for this offense. It can be one of the best, if not the best offense in the country. If they can't block for Jackson Dart, they're not going to hit the ceiling that they want to hit. So Diego Pounds has a couple of huge weeks ahead of him, and if he can hit week one running, then this is going to be a terrifying offense to deal with. And then over at Alabama, I have Zabien Brown as the number one guy by a margin. He is someone that absolutely is going to play big-time snaps for this team, might even start at the other cornerback position right next to Damani Jackson. So he's someone that's absolutely going to have to play. There are about 3 freshmen on this team in the back end of that defense that are going to have to play, but Zabien Brown is the guy that is the biggest of the bunch. He's going to have to be ready to play pretty much right away. We talked about it earlier on, but they play WKU, who's going to throw the ball a ton week one. Then they play a USF team that is not going to be easy to deal with by any means in week 2. And then they go up to Wisconsin, and they have plenty of weapons up there with a guy like Phil Longo that can get some guys open. And then you have Georgia. So it's not like you have this big-time runway, especially on that back end of that defense, to get some things going. You're going to be attacked pretty much from the get-go, and if a guy like Zabien Brown does not look solid from the jump, then they're going to have some problems over there. So a couple of huge weeks for him. If he can put it together and they go in feeling good about their 2 corner positions, this back end looks a lot better than it does right now. But we'll obviously keep you updated with that as it continues on. And then Kendrick Law is the other guy that I think needs to have a big-time fall. or fall camp, excuse me. This passing offense needs a guy. When I look across the options they have, Jeremy Bernard is a really good player. Kobe Prentice is a really fun player. Ryan Williams, even the freshman, I think could be a real factor for this team. But the guy that stands out is Kendrick Law. He's the one that is a big-time deep threat, which is Jalen Milroe's bread and butter. That's what he likes to throw, is that deep ball, and he throws it probably better than pretty much anyone in the entire country. And then you can get him out on screen passes, kind of like they did Jalen McMillan or Jalen Polk at Washington a year ago. You can get this guy out on the edge, and he can just open up an offense just with his feet. And that's kind of the big-time thing for a quarterback that isn't necessarily the most accurate in those short and intermediate passes. Getting them the ones that just get him in a rhythm are huge, and I think this will probably be the guy that gets those passes. But let's move along to Oregon here, and Alex Orji is the easiest answer of the bunch. He's absolutely someone that needs to take ownership of this position. He has all of the tools. He has all of the athletic ability. He does things that Jack Tuttle cannot do. So he has a leg up in this competition than over Jack Tuttle, because when he gets out on the edge, he is special. There's no two ways about it, and he's absolutely someone that is going to have a factor one way or another on this offense, but he needs to be the starting quarterback. He needs to be the guy that is on the field starting every single game, and the way he does that is just being more consistent through the air. If he can hit the guy on time, on target, then he's going to be more than fine. He's not going to be asked to do a lot. They're going to run the ball a ton in this offense, and he'll be asked to do even less than J.J. McCarthy was a year ago, but he's going to have to hit those moments when he gets them. There's no two ways about that, and absolutely is going to have to be huge for him, but he's got to have someone to pass to as well, which is why I think Tyler Morris has to have a huge year, or a huge couple of weeks as well, because they need to go in with a wide receiver one. Kind of the same deal as Alabama, where you have a lot of guys I like. You have a lot of guys that I think could be really good players. I don't know if they have an outright wide receiver one right now. This is the guy that could be that guy. I definitely think he could step up and kind of fit everyone into their roles. I think Samaje Morgan is a good player. He's probably better suited as a wide receiver 2 than a wide receiver 1. I think Frederick Moore is a good player. Probably shouldn't be the guy that you go to every single down. So I do think they're going to have someone step up, and Tyler Morris is really one of the few guys on that team that I think could. And then you have Colston Loveland, which makes this a little bit easier, but I do think they're going to have a difference maker on that outside, and I think Tyler Morris just might have to be that guy. And then you move on, you got another quarterback here. Cade Klubnik has to have a huge year or a huge couple of weeks for Clemson, because they got to walk in with this guy fully confident. It has to be no hesitation walking to Mercedes-Benz on that day, because if you don't, you're in trouble. That's just the reality. If you walk in with any type of hesitation, you are going to get trounced by this team. I can promise you that, because Georgia is one of those teams that smells blood in the water. They know when another team on the sideline is a little bit scared, and if you walk in a little bit scared, they will make you look dumb. That's just the reality, and Clemson is a very, very fun team. They are one of those teams that has a lot of things in place to make a lot of noise this upcoming year. They just got to get more from that quarterback position. I think Cade Klubnik showed some flashes last year and did some really nice things, and it is somewhat Garrett Riley having to get along a little bit better in this offense, but he's just got to make more plays. He's got to be able to hit these wide receivers at a more consistent clip, and he's got more guys to choose from this time around, but they're not necessarily as experienced as you would have liked, so it's kind of a toss-up in the air, but they got to walk into that week 1 matchup knowing that this is their guy, knowing that he's going to play elite football, and if they don't, they're going to get chewed up and spit out. So a huge couple of weeks for Cade Klubnik, and if he can have a huge couple of weeks into a huge season, then this is a very, very fun player that could totally elevate what this team is capable of this year. And then I really just wrote down the wide receivers as a whole, but Adam Randall might be the number one guy here. I do think there's a number of guys on this team that need to make some noise. I think Troy Stelato's got to make some plays pretty much consistently for this team. I think Antonio Williams is a very veteran player, but he's got to show that. He's got to be the guy that you can go to on a third down and feel very confident that he's going to make that catch. I think Adam Randall's the one that opens up this offense. I think he is a big physical receiver, the one that you can throw up to in a 50-50 type situation and feel good that he's going to come down with it. And I think he kind of opens up this offense in a way that the other two really good players, but don't necessarily have that big pop play ability as Adam Randall does. And you would love for Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore, the two freshmen over there, to show flashes throughout their first year. you don't want them being the guys. You'd never want them being the guys that you have to go to. So I think someone like Adam Randall could kind of open up this offense and just make everything a little bit easier on guys like Antonio Williams, guys like Bryant Wesco coming into the offense. You're going to need a leader there, and it's going to have to be a veteran guy. So Adam Randall might just be that guy. And then you got Florida State. I'm going to take DJU, and he's someone that this is really easy. There's no two ways about that. I think he comes in with a lot of questions about the consistency he can have at the quarterback position, especially throwing the ball, and he can throw that. He can show that over the next couple of weeks that he's kind of gotten over that. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be moments where it doesn't look perfect, but at the end of the day, he absolutely has a huge ceiling, and if he can start to get some consistency in the passing game and start to get a rapport with these wide receivers, they can be really dangerous on the offensive side of the ball. I can promise you that. And then on the outside, you're going to have a wide receiver to throw to, and while I think Malik Benson's going to be a great player, I think Hakeem Williams might be the one that totally changes this offense. I think he might be the most special of the bunch, and I think he's someone that, kind of like Keon Coleman from the last couple of years, can just go up and get touchdowns for you. If you need a play late in that Clemson game, this might be the guy that ends up making that play. So I think he has to have a next couple of weeks has to be huge for him. He has to show that right up there next to Malik Benson, they have another guy that's going to be as much of a problem, and you're going to have to worry about him just as much. So I think he's a very special player, and I think with someone like DJ, when you have a guy that has that big catch radius and can catch some screen passes and go for 40, 50 yards, it helps you a ton. So I absolutely love this kid in general. I think he's going to be an absolute beast, and he's going to have to be over the next couple of weeks as they head into this huge year for Florida State. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do some fall camp updates. We just gave you some players that have to have huge fall camps. Let's see if they are having huge fall camps thus far. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some of the players that just have to have big fall camps. They have to go into the season with a lot of confidence. A couple quarterbacks on that list, including Cade Klubnik and DJU. They're absolutely going to have huge camps and go in with a ton of confidence into week one, because they don't necessarily have the easiest matchups going into week 1 or week 0 for Florida State. But let's get into some fall camp intel. There is so much going on all around the country, and the updates just keep rolling in. So I'm trying to keep you as updated as I can, and we'll start over in Nebraska. Although that is a Wake Forest jersey, we are going to start in Nebraska. Jamal Banks came over from Wake Forest and seems to be the wide receiver one over in Lincoln at this moment. And frankly, they need one. I think they have a very talented wide receiver core. I think they need a guy that Dylan Raiola can look at, see his number, and say, that's where I'm going with the football. So that is going to help him a ton if Jamal Banks can solidify himself as the number one guy. And then you have a guy like Jalen Lloyd that is such a danger down the field. You have Isaiah Nayer, who has a catch radius that is absolutely ridiculous. You have a really fun wide receiver group, but you're going to need that go-to guy. It sounds like Jamal Banks, at least early on in fall camp, is becoming that guy for Dylan Raiola. And then Keona Davis is someone that's making a ton of noise, a freshman D lineman that everyone is loving on over there in Lincoln, Nebraska. I think if you add another real option to this defensive front, it could be one of the best in the entire country. And when you have MJ Sherman coming off one edge, if you can have a really talented freshman coming off the other, you could have a lot of fun rushing the passer this upcoming year in Lincoln. So a good sign for them, not only in this year, but going forward. Maybe he doesn't have a huge contribution this upcoming year, but maybe he's a guy you have to worry about when MJ Sherman walks out the door. This guy steps right in and plays big-time football. But let's move over to Notre Dame, where they had some not-so-great news. Charles Jagusa was announced that he had a upper body injury, I believe a pectoral injury, where he will miss the entirety of the 2024 season. That puts them in a really tough spot. Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner are going to be in the mix for that left tackle. The other one's going to play right tackle. So that's kind of where they're at the tackle positions. They were not necessarily at a great spot going into camp. it just got a little bit tougher. Emil Wagner is playing some really good football during camp and someone that they're going to have to see continue to grow. But regardless, you pretty much got two guys that you're going to be starting at one of those positions. Who's ever the better one is going to be at left tackle. Whoever the worst one is going to be at right tackle, and every other team knows that. So it's going to be one of those things that could define Notre Dame's season this upcoming year, and we'll see how big of a deal it is. But a couple other players just got a ton more on their table than Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner. But let's talk about the outside, because the wide receiver group has not been great over the last couple of years in Notre Dame. It sounds like it's coming along. They added guys like Bo Collins, who was a really good player at Clemson a year ago. Chris Mitchell is the biggest addition on the outside, but Jaden Thomas is the one that is making the most noise in fall camp thus far. I think you add him to Bo Collins, to Chris Mitchell, to Jaden Greathouse. I think you have a really fun wide receiver group there. And then Jeremiah Love and then Mitchell Evans catching the ball as well. You have plenty of offensive weapons where as long as you can protect the quarterback, you'll be more than fine. And then that defensive front is doing exactly what you expect them to do. Luke Tolick is someone on the back end of that defense that is making some big time noise, a very lengthy, long guy that might end up playing this upcoming year, especially with a couple of injuries in that back end. So something to watch there. Let's move forward to Georgia here, though, and let's talk about Warren Brinson and Jordan Hall first. Both of them are nursing injuries, and both are very talented defensive tackles that will likely need to play at some point this upcoming season, and Warren Brinson will likely need to start that first week, so they'll have to get him up to speed pretty quickly. Also, Jared Wilson, the starting center, is out with the injury as of right now, but not really sure what the story is there. It sounded like he was nursing an injury throughout spring, but he had gotten healthy and was back on the field. Now he's not again, so not really sure what's going on there. Definitely will give you updates as we hear more. Another thing that's kind of happening is the star player is not necessarily playing the level of football that Kirby Smart wants. I think that nickel back we talked about yesterday, Johnny Aguero, the guy in that picture right there, he's likely going to be the starter there. They need more out of him, apparently. Apparently, he is not playing that position to Kirby Smart's liking. Frankly, Kirby Smart has very, very high standards for his team, but it doesn't change that they could have real problems there, and it's someone that has to hit. They need someone at that nickel corner that is the glue of that entire back end, and if he's not getting enough from Johnny Aguero or from Ja'Cory Thomas, then they might not have an answer there, and they might have an issue on their hands. But we'll see what happens there. Dalen Everett and Daniel Harris are the starting corners right now, with the freshmen in the two deep, so you'll see plenty of KJ Bolden and Ellis Robinson this upcoming year. And then on the outside, Colby Young is the one to watch. He's the one that is making the most noise. He's been making noise pretty much since spring ball, so the Georgia fans absolutely love him right now. I think he's going to be a huge player for him, especially with Ra Thomas getting dismissed from the team. And then Nitro Tuggle is a freshman that has made a number of plays as well. This is just an outright speed guy, so you can just get him the ball and let him fly, and he's going to be a really fun player in time at UGA, I can promise you that. Over at Alabama, they love that defensive line. They feel like they have a really, really good defensive line on their hands. And frankly, when you have Jaheim Otis and LT Overton, you're going to have a really good defensive line. They absolutely love it. Kalen DeBoer spoke really glowingly about that group, and they're going to have to be really good. If that back end is not necessarily going to be on the top level that it usually is, they're going to have to get to the quarterback and wreak havoc in other ways. So having that defensive front that's going to be really strong definitely helps them out a lot. And then you have Zabien Brown. He's been making a lot of noise. We just talked about him a little bit earlier. He's going to have a huge fall camp. He's had a solid camp thus far. I think he still has a little bit of ways to go, but absolutely is someone that is doing everything that they're asking of him right now. And I think if you walked on the field and didn't know he was a freshman, you probably wouldn't guess he's a freshman right now. He's built very, very solidly and will absolutely be a player for this team. And then finally, you have Ryan Williams, someone that is showing a ton of talent at that wide receiver position. I think he's a very talented kid. I think if they do have to rely on him to be wide receiver one, they might have a little bit of problem. But overall, a very talented kid, someone that's definitely going to make some noise in this offense and is making that known pretty early on. Tennessee has some injury trouble as well. Lance Hurd has been using a bulky knee brace on his left knee and did not take part in most of the drills for the offensive linemen. If that's the case, they have a little bit of problem at that left tackle position. I do think he'll probably end up playing by week 1, but they're going to have to get that thing ready. Dane Davis has taken over for him in the first group at that left tackle position, but this is the guy. This is the guy that they need healthy, and if he's not healthy going into the season, maybe they have a little bit of an issue on their hands. And then the wide receiver group looks as ridiculous as it does on paper. Chris Brazzell is really coming on and starting really strong. Dante Thornton is coming back from an injury and has had a really nice camp. Squirrel White's already there. Chaz Nimrod, Caleb Webb, Brew McCoy. It's ridiculous what this offense has to throw at you, and it seems like everything is going according to plan as of right now. Over at Ole Miss, you have Juice Wells, who came in from South Carolina, and there is some bad blood between him and the Gamecocks, it seems, which will be a very fun game this upcoming year. But it sounds like he's doing exactly what he did in the 2022 season, which was downright special. He is a really, really fun player, and if he can come along the way that Ole Miss fans expect him to and the way he is right now, they have two wide receiver ones on that roster in him and Trey Harris. So very much like this kid. I think it's a very talented kid that absolutely will make some noise. Some injury news that was not so great, obviously not around Jackson Dart, although there was apparently a rumor going around that he had trouble with his ACL. He does not. He is more than fine and is absolutely dominating that defense apparently in matchups. But Nate Kalepo is someone that we need to talk about. He is a transfer guard from Washington, and he is not playing as of right now. He is not in practice and has kind of been just a viewer for most of the practices, and it sounds like he'll be fine. Sounds like it's not too big of an injury, but definitely something to watch, again, with an offensive line that just needs to come along and needs to be elite this upcoming year. Over at LSU, Sage Ryan is working at the cornerback position. He came in as a safety, and that's where a lot of people have put him, so some people are surprised. I tend to think cornerback is probably where he fits better, especially with the makeup of the rest of this team, so I do think this is probably the best decision, and we'll see what happens with him, but I tend to think corner is probably the place for him to be. And then the guy that's really showing out back there is Ashton Stamps. He has gotten a ton of really, really good reviews, playing really consistent, solid football, and that's exactly what this back end needs. They need a guy that when you see his number guarding someone, you feel pretty confident the ball is not going in that direction. So very much like this kid, likely will be a starter on that back end and will be huge for them this upcoming season. And then not so much new news by any means. Kyron Lacey is a monster. He is absolutely dominating pretty much everyone in that practice and will be a huge player for this team. He is going to be the outright wide receiver one by a pretty comfortable margin, if you ask me, and he might just be one of the best wide receivers in the country this upcoming year. So I do think he's going to be a monster, and he's showing that throughout fall camp. Now, you don't know what that means. Does that mean the back end is bad? Does that mean the wide receivers are awesome? I tend to lean more towards the wide receivers are awesome, but if last year shows us anything, it could definitely be the other one. So we'll see what happens there. Definitely a ton of more updates that we'll keep a lookout for in LSU camp, especially on that defensive side of the ball. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do some conference questions. We're going to bounce around to every conference throughout this week, but we're going to do the SEC first and just get out some questions I have for this upcoming season. Maybe we'll do this a couple of times before the season starts, but let's do that right after this break, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different tidbits out of fall camp thus far. Definitely a ton of things going on all around the country, and we'll keep you updated with everything going on as it comes out. But let's get into some conference questions. We're going to go through all of the conferences throughout this week and break down some of the different questions I have around that conference as we head into what's going to be a crazy year across pretty much every single one. So let's get into the SEC first here, and I want to start with Texas, and I want to talk about their defensive line. What if Texas just can't control the line of scrimmage? What if they don't handle this SEC physicality the way that it seems they might be able to. There's definitely a difference between them being a 3-loss team and a playoff team, and it's probably decided on that defensive front. I do think they have a lot of really good players there, but SEC's physicality is real. There's no two ways about that. And frankly, this year in particular, the offensive lines are so strong across pretty much every team around the conference that you're going to have to face a really good offensive line pretty much every time you go on that field. If you're Texas and you can't handle the person leaning up against you, if you can't handle the really aggressive offensive lines that you're going to go against, you're not going to be successful. Plain and simple. You're not going to be able to hold a lot of these teams that you hypothetically should be able to. You know, an Arkansas team that is going to be able to run the ball, a Florida team that is going to want to run the ball. You're not going to be able to pull away from those teams the way that on paper it should look like you should, and sometimes it'll come down to plays that you have no control over. Maybe a fumble bounces the wrong way. Maybe a pick bounces off a receiver's hands and into a Florida defender's hand. So you want to make those games as wide a margin as possible, and the way you do that is dominating the line of scrimmage. And right now, it doesn't necessarily look too great about this Texas defensive line, but I do want to talk about the guy on the screen right there. Jermaine Lole is the one that I think could really open up this for Texas, could make this kind of a non-issue. This is a 7th-year defensive tackle, very good at run fits, very solid in the run game, and can definitely be that big-time space eater that they absolutely need. I think him, along with Bill Norton, is going to be a really good player for them. I think they have options. That's kind of the point here. They definitely have options to kind of throw at you, but if none of them pan out, if they don't have 2 or 4, really 4 guys at least, that they can throw out there at the defensive tackle positions, they're going to have teams that just run all over them. They're going to have teams that just stay in games that really aren't meant to stay in those games. They're going to have teams that, like that Arkansas game, where on paper you look at it and Texas will probably be a 14-point favorite. They'll probably walk in and should win by multiple touchdowns. They won't if they can't control that defensive, or they can't control the line of scrimmage, especially on the defensive line. So obviously it will be a very interesting thing to watch. I do think they have enough guys to make this kind of a non-problem, but as of right now, it's still a very big question mark around this Texas team. Then you move forward to Bama. Does Bama have the guy at wide receiver? We talked about Kendrick Law needing to have a big fall camp, and I definitely think that's the case, but what if he doesn't? From where I'm standing, they have a ton of really good players. They have a ton of really fun wide receivers. They don't have a wide receiver one. I think Jeremy Bernard is a guy that absolutely could take a step forward and be a big-time player for them, one form or another, whether that's, being that short yardage guy that makes all the big-time catches, whether that's being a downfield threat. I don't know, but at the end of the day, he's someone that's very savvy, very smart, and definitely could make that leap. I think Ryan Williams is someone else to watch, absolutely a super talented freshman that could make that leap, but also there's a guy that's not there that, frankly, I think is a wide receiver one. I think Jalen Hale is an absolute beast. He got injured earlier in, I believe, spring, and hasn't come back yet. And I don't really know what the outlook on that is. I haven't really gotten a firm update since, I believe, May. So it's been quite some time since we've heard a lot on the Jalen Hale front. But this kid is outright incredible. If he's on this team, if he can get back as quickly as possible, I don't know how quick that would possibly be, but I absolutely love this kid. I think he could be a wide receiver one on many different rosters around the country, and I think especially on Alabama's, he could be a huge player. Now, they don't necessarily have him right now, so that obviously opens the door for a guy like Jeremy Bernard or a guy like Ryan Williams to make some big-time plays throughout fall camp, but as of right now, I look at this roster and I don't see a wide receiver one. Well, I see a wide receiver one, but he's just on the bench right now. So if they can get Jalen Hale back, a lot of this stuff changes. But as of right now, I don't see that guy at the wide receiver position. He could show himself over the next couple of weeks, but as of right now, don't necessarily love where that position is at for Alabama. Then you move forward to Georgia, and the question around Georgia is just, will the schedule derail them? This is a schedule that, frankly, they have not had to deal with over the last couple of years in Athens, Georgia. They have had plenty of tough games. I'm not here to tear apart Georgia's schedule, but it's not near what they're going to face this upcoming year. It starts in week 1 against Clemson, obviously. That is going to be a game that is going to be tough. There's no two ways about that. We saw that game back in 2021. It was 10-7, and it was absolutely or 10-3, excuse me, and absolutely off the walls, a very, very weird defensive game. This one's going to be a little different. I can almost promise you that, but this is not going to be a layup for Georgia by any means. I think a lot of people look at this one and whether they don't like Dabo Swinney or they just think Georgia's an absolute monster, they assume that Georgia is going to win by multiple touchdowns. That might not be the case. This is going to be a really, really tough game, and it could be one that Georgia comes out with an L in, and it'll be really, really interesting to see what that develops as. But overall, they have to start really fast, and this would be the game to do that in. And then you have an Ole Miss game later down the road. You have at Bama. You have at Texas. You have so many games on the schedule that could hand you a loss if you're just walking in a little lackadaisical into Bryant-Denny or into DKR or into Vaught Hemingway. You're going to have some problems on your hands. I can promise you that, and it could lead to an L for them. So overall, I mean, you look at this Georgia team, and they have plenty going for them. There's no two ways about that. This is the best team in the country, if you were to ask me, but they are facing more teams this year than they ever had to face in terms of national title contenders. They have so many games on the schedule that could stumble them at some point, and then add that to Tennessee, add Kentucky in there, because that's going to be a really fun team this year. There are a ton of teams that could trip Georgia up this year and could bring them all the way down to a 9-3, maybe even a 8-4 season. I don't necessarily think that's what's going to happen, but definitely a schedule that Georgia has not had to deal with and could stumble them up this upcoming year. Then you have Ole Miss, and I do think the biggest question here is, can you pull all of these transfers together? Can you get all of these guys together, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and build a top 20 defense? Because I think that's kind of where they have to be. Maybe top 25, top 30 would be good enough, but overall, you're going to have to take a step forward on the defensive side of the ball, plain and simple, and that's why they went and got all the remarkably talented players they did. But at the end of the day, I do think they're going to need a ton of really big players to step up. I think we talked about Chris Paul Jr., how huge he's going to be in the middle of that defense. Brandon Turnage is also going to be huge, especially on that back end where you had a ton of troubles last year, and you brought in almost an entirely new cast that is going to start and possibly be on the 2 deep for you. You need a guy that's going to connect everyone, and he plays that nickel position like we've talked about, being the kind of glue guy in that back end. I think he's going to be huge for this team. I think J.J. Pegues is huge for this team in terms of communication and getting everyone aligned and making sure on that defensive front especially, just making sure everyone is doing what they need to do. And then we talked about Chris Paul Jr. He is going to be the voice of this defense. He's in the very center of it, and I think he might just be the leader of this defense. So he's going to have to communicate a lot. He's going to have to make sure everyone's in the right place. He's going to have to make sure there's no, beef in between the defensive players, because that will factor into the on-field play. So they got to be at least top 25, top 30. They have to be in that conversation for one of the better defenses in the country if they want to win a national title, and they absolutely want to win a national title. So it'll be interesting to see if they can pull it all together. I think they have the players to do it, but maybe there's a couple of things that come into play that they do not expect, and it doesn't necessarily go the way they want. But let's get into the last question here. Oh, J.J. Pegues right there. Let's get into the last question here and talk about the most dangerous team in this conference. And I had to go a little bit back in the wells for this one, but A&M and Oklahoma are absolutely teams that could make some noise in this conference. I think when you talk about, Missouri is another team that I don't necessarily know if they're under the radar by any means, but absolutely could turn this conference on its head. You could even go to Florida if you really wanted to be dangerous like that. But the team that I'm watching is the team that pretty much everyone is, the Tennessee Volunteers. When you talk about this team, they are absolutely special at so many different positions. Wide receiver probably being the main among them. There are so many different guys that are going to make big-time plays this upcoming year, and frankly, it's a better wide receiver group than they had back in 2022 when they made all that type of noise with Hendon Hooker. So if you can get somewhat of what you got out of Hendon Hooker in 2022 from Nico Iamaleava, now, I'm not expecting him to be a Heisman finalist. I'm not expecting him to be possibly the Heisman winner going into that 10th week game, but I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he needs to execute, and I think he has plenty of options to go to if he needs to make a play. So I think they have plenty on that side of the ball. They're going to make plenty of plays and have so many really, really good playmakers on the outside, especially in also a run game that I think is going to be really solid. As long as they can figure out that offensive line, they'll be more than fine. And then on the defensive side of the ball, when you have James Pierce Jr., you got a shot. He's someone that's totally going to wreak so much havoc on every offense. I think the back end needs to come together a little bit. Someone like Boo Carter needs to make some more plays. They're tons of players on that back end, frankly, that need to make some big plays as they head into this season. But when you have James Pierce Jr. on that front, when you have the entire defensive front that they have, frankly, you're going to be able to be in some of these SEC games. And I cannot wait to watch this team. I think they have so many chances to turn people's heads, whether it's knocking off Bama or knocking off Georgia. Maybe they could ruin the fun for some of the other teams in this conference just by beating some of these bigger teams. I think they're a team that is as dangerous as there is across the country. I think they could make so much noise in this conference, and frankly, I would be a little bit surprised if they didn't win one of those games that is a Bama or a UGA or an Ole Miss. I don't exactly know if they play Ole Miss, but regardless, they're going to win one of those games against one of those teams that they haven't beaten very often in the past, and will kind of maybe turn a corner for Tennessee. It'll be really, really fun to watch that team, and I do think they're the most dangerous team, not only in the SEC, but maybe in the entire country. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC podcast, GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. With the Olympics going on, we have tons of people covering the Olympics, so no worries about that. Anything you need in the world of sports, we totally have you covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.